This episode is brought to you by iZotope. Our friends over at iZotope create the most thoughtfully and intuitively designed software for audio repair, mixing, and mastering. I use their tools every day for the podcast, and I love it. And I think you will too. Go over to iZotope.com and check it out. That's iZotope.com. iZotope. Use the code FRET10 at checkout for a 10% discount. That's all caps, F-R-E-T, and the number 10.
Thank you, David, for doing this. I think it's going to be something that will last for posterity, and that it'll be something that when people want to know about our story, they're going to be able to refer to this as the real story. I appreciate it. Appreciate you giving us all a voice. It was fun talking to you. I enjoyed it.
Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebrow, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Moby Grape. Psst. Along with our special guest, Moby Grape drummer and songwriter Don Stevenson. This is part 3 of our conversation with the man. Here's just a few of the many things that Don and I discuss in this podcast. How Skip Spence's oar really got made, not the mythological pajama-wearing motorcycle ride to Nashville that's been bandied about for years. The difficulty of Bob Mosley's breakdown occurring in the much larger shadow of Skip's concurrent mental problems. The reasons why their final album, 2010's The Real Potato, was shelved, that'll be in the director's cut only. How their disastrous 1971 gig at the Fillmore East really went down, the unimaginable horrors that occurred during the making of 20 Granite Creek, and a track-by-track deep dive on Truly Fine Citizen, 20 Granite Creek, Live Grape, Legendary Grape, and several other records Moby Grape made during this period. If you're a Moby Grape superfan like me, you'll want to turn this free version off right now and opt for the director's cut of this episode on our Patreon page, which features a whopping 27 additional minutes of essential material. And you can find it in our Patreon shop for mere pennies at patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. This episode is part of a series called Grape Expectations, a Rashomon-style overview of the band Moby Grape. Not only are they one of the all-time best, but there is no crazier story in the history of music than that of the Grape. It includes disastrous tours, lawsuits, police busts, horribly nefarious managers, a fake touring version of the band, mysterious black magic witches, drug-induced madness, insane asylums, and attempted murder with an axe. And no joke, that's just within the band's first 2 years. There will be separate interviews with all 3 living members of the band, Peter Lewis, Don Stevenson, and Bob Mosley, plus an epic interview with band biographer Cam Cobb on the great Skip Spence, and some surprise guests. The only way to hear the entirety of Grape Expectations is to visit patreon.com/discograffiti and subscribe at the major tier. If you don't want to subscribe, you can either click on the Collections tab and simply purchase the whole series, or even get them piecemeal, but the public episodes have been edited down for time, plus the Monday bonus episodes, which is half the series, aren't being aired publicly in full. So if you're a Grape fan, trust me, you'll want to get over to Patreon lickety-split. Coming up, we've got an interview with Lenny Waronker, Denny Tedesco on his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, an unprecedentedly intimate interview with Marilyn Wilson Rutherford and her cousin and Honey's bandmate Ginger Blake, Plus, Season 3 of the Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True series, which will absolutely, without question, delve deeper into Pet Sounds and Smile than anyone else ever has in history. Plus, an incredibly special Graham Nash deep dive in which Graham himself rates and discusses everything he's ever released. That means solo, CSN, CSNY, Crosby and Nash, and for good measure, Crosby's If I Could Only Remember My Name. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then. So, Cam, aside from the $1 million lawsuit that Cates files against the Grape in late '68, how is Bob doing psychologically, and is the band stress causing further impact on his state?
Well, yeah, that could be the case. They take Matthew Cates, so they start a court case where I think it's through Columbia that they're actually challenging Cates. And that starts, I think it's in May of '69. I believe it's May. I might be wrong, though. It might be March. So that starts, and that's right around the time that Bob leaves. And Columbia is sort of managing this.
So Bob is out in May?
Oh, Bob's out before that. He's out like pretty much after they come back from their tour in England and Europe. Bob's done.
Okay.
And he goes back to San Francisco. He goes to school first, and then he gets his draft card, and he asks to go into the Marines after he gets his draft card. And so that might be around the summertime or like later on. But first off, he's in school, actually.
So when he's in the Marines, I know that that's when he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and he got into a fist fight with another Marine, was kicked out of the Marines after 9 months, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. He was at 29 Palms.
I can't imagine, honestly, that time for Bob to have gone through the craziness of the Grape and then to be squaring off with himself, face to face with himself, and to experience all that in the Marines. It must have been unimaginably confusing for the guy.
Devastating. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't picture that, honestly.
Yeah. So Bob was out. The band was basically inactive, and Tim DeLera, the road manager who was very chummy with Jerry, who helped get Jerry's guitar back in '67, Tim was advocating for the band to have another album out with Columbia. So eventually they work out that they're going to go to Nashville. And again, Skip had been there in December, the Byrds and Dylan, and it's become kind of a mecca for musicians, especially musicians who were interested in pursuing, like combining rock and pop and country and folk. And the Grape always were able to really meld different styles so well. And so they went to Nashville at the end of May of 1969.
What I want to know is, how did this thing coalesce? Because I know first it was you and Jerry, right, Don? And then you guys convinced Peter to come, right?
Right.
So tell me if you can remember, because all I have that gets us to this record is in 1969, I have a quote, Peter saying, "I was under the care of a psychiatrist taking all this Librium so I could stay with the band."
Yeah, well, I'm glad he did, but he didn't stay for too terribly long. Bob had quit, so was Jerry and I. And like I mentioned, Tim DeLera went with us to Nashville. And I think it was an obligation. I think we had to do one more album.
Right.
So we were kind of excited to go to Nashville. And to tell you the truth, maybe it's just that I'm a bit of an optimist, but I think that that particular album is one of my favorite albums to do. I just actually wrote a song last year about this young couple called Grady's Farm. And it's a young couple in the 50s that fell in love and that were 15 and 16 years old, and they got married, and people were saying that it's never going to work and all that. But it was all set up in Tennessee. It was all set up in Nashville. I still have great memories of Nashville. It's one of my favorite places I've ever been.
Yeah, me too.
When we got to Nashville, Jerry and I and Tim, we just started to go in the studio and to play a little bit and to practice a little bit. Bobby Moore, who played bass with us, who was a famous bass player, played with a lot of celebrities and great players, played with Dylan. And
played with Elvis Presley, and also was one of the founders of Monument Records, which for many years was where Roy Orbison put his music out.
Yeah, that's a pretty nice little bass player to have with us.
Yeah.
So we did some rehearsals and taught him some songs, and then we would get up in the morning and go have breakfast, and breakfast would be like biscuits and gravy, and it was just like so tense. In the evening, we'd walk around. There were open porches. You could hear people playing guitar. The streets were full. People were out on their porch. It was an alive place. First time I ever saw any fireflies was in Tennessee, which was really cool, you know.
How reluctant was Peter to do this? Was it easy to convince him to come down?
He didn't stay for long. You know, he just came in and did the best he could, and then he left. You know?
I mean, you guys recorded for 3 days, May 27th, 28th, and 29th.
Yeah.
You were in and out. You know, it seems like one of the big contrasts for me. And by the way, it's so great to hear all these good memories, because anything I've ever heard about the project feels, at least externally, slightly depressing, because I know Bob Johnston, who was producing in lieu of David Rubinson. What I heard was that he was apparently stern from the outset. And according to you guys, what I heard is that he said, I've heard about you guys. If this record isn't going to be done in 3 days, then you can go home now.
That's okay.
David Rubinson was swept away by magic and the excitement of it. And this is like 2 years ago. And then here's this guy who, before you even lay a note down, is kind of being a cock.
Well, it was, like I said, it was a mandatory project. And so Columbia, there was absolutely no patience with anything. It was just like, we have to do this. So, you know, get it done and get the hell out of here. As I told you, that wasn't my experience in Tennessee. That was the parameters of recording studio. So the recording studio was, you know, under the gun. But we did get a couple of days beforehand, you know, to go over some songs and with Bobby. And Peter came in and played, I think, a day before we went in the studio and played some songs.
What I read is that he quickly learned the songs in your hotel room right before recording.
Yeah, we were just like jammed, right?
You and Jerry credited all your songs on the record, and there were a lot, to Tim DeLara.
Yeah, well, Tim DeLara was our road manager and a great guy. But if you look even on the album, it has a picture of the cop leaning up against the building. That was the Truly Fine Citizen. And again, the Truly Fine Citizen wasn't because of any other reason than that cop was there to protect us. You know, because we were smoking joints outside of the studio,
right.
And he didn't care. He just, if anybody comes around and's got a problem, so I'll just kind of send him the other way. So he was an advocate for us, and so we named the album after him. We attributed all the songs to Tim DeLara because even though we knew that this album wasn't going to be promoted, that was pretty much a given. But in case one of the songs took off or something happened, we didn't want Matthew Cates to have any rights to it. Right. So there was nobody in the band that wrote any of these songs. They were all written by Tim DeLara.
No, his songs are credited to him. So I don't know.
Well, Peter, excuse me, except for Peter. Anything that Jerry and I wrote, we credited to Tim DeLara.
So did Peter run into any problems getting paid?
I have no idea. You have to ask Peter. So
I want to say that my overview of this record runs contrary to most of what I've heard. And I'm going to quote Robert Christgau here, the dean of rock critics, as they say. He gave it a C+ and wrote, in which what should have been America's greatest rock group gasps its last. Quite mediocre, despite a couple of lovely Peter Lewis songs. But my experience with this record is I absolutely love it. And there's a feeling on this record to me that probably is born from the circumstances, i.e. a fast turnaround, what sounds like a live in the studio feel, and just not a lot of doting on the material, just laying it down and moving along. That to me is always offered what has always felt like a very welcoming vibe. And I like the material on it, more so side one, but I think the whole thing is really good, and I've always loved it.
That's generous. And I tell you what, as I get older, I become less critical of that album. I guess maybe it's just because you get a little more understanding of what the situation was, and I can look at me then from this point of view and realize that the songs did not reach their total, to the possibility of which they could have. Mm-hmm. But some of those songs were pretty good.
I think most.
Yeah. Like I said, as I look at that album right now, I have a lot more regard for it than I had in the past.
I know you guys are stoned, but you guys sound, because if you're a true fan of Moby Grape, then you know that at this point in the story, you guys are beat to shit, understandably, and exhausted. And it's reflected in this record. And as a fan of the Grape as a whole, and including your tale, I like that your art is reflective of who you are at this point in time.
Right. That's a good point. That's really a good point. So, yeah, Jerry and I wrote some songs and recorded them not under duress, but you could almost under duress. But again, like I said, the experience of being in Tennessee and the experience of playing with Bobby and, just hanging out with Jerry. We went to the drive-in movie when we were there on acid.
Nice.
What was that? We went to the Grand Ole Opry.
What did you see on acid? Do you remember what you saw at the drive-in?
Yeah, The Big Hurt.
Okay. Did you and Cam Cobb ever trip?
Me and Cam?
Yeah.
We're stoned right now.
When was the last time you did acid? I can tell you the day for me.
That was probably about the last time I did acid.
69?
Yeah.
Wow.
And by 72, I was raising a family.
Right.
And, I was still playing and looking for meaningful work up in Seattle as a musician for a long time.
Yeah.
But that was my nose to the grindstone. I was supporting my family and trying to anyway.
I mean, some of the greatest times of my life were on acid, but the thought of me doing it today, it would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
It would definitely not go well.
Well, it was a time. There's a time and a place for everything, right? And that was it. It opened up a world that needed to be opened up at that time, awareness.
And the greatest thing about that world is it's always open to you once you do it.
Well, yeah. Yeah, you can get back there through any number of ways.
Right.
So that's cool.
Let's put the needle down on this bad boy. So we start with what I always thought was a great opener for the record, Changes, Circles Spinning. It's a Peter Lewis song that is definitely not the first Peter Lewis song that you think of when you think of Peter, but it's a great intro to the record. And certainly, as far as what you guys were going through, it couldn't have been a more succinct overview of the confusion you guys were experiencing.
Yeah. So Peter, like I said, Peter brought a couple of songs to this album, and he was like, in and out, as I can recall. He was there, and he was there to take care of his songs, and that was kind of it. We didn't party or do things together. He just came in and did his songs. And that's a great song.
Yeah.
And it's right there in that genre, that country rock, which we were, very familiar with. That was one of our styles, right? And one of the things we did. So we just fell right into his song. It's got some great guitar work in it. Again, Jerry and him did some really nice guitar things in there, in the spaces in between verses.
That's one characteristic of this record that's kind of all over the place. It's this really interesting sort of lazy shit kicker vibe, because you can hear that you can kind of hear the guitar sound stoned, but all the licks are super tasty and it's slathered all over every song. So it's a really delightful aspect of the record, I think. And one thing I just realized, it never consciously hit me, is that Peter was really involved with records 1 and 3 and kind of in the shadows on 2 and 4.
Yeah, that's true. He was having some problems on both of those.
Look, Looper, which is the second track, has been hanging around trying to kick its way into a track listing for years at this point. So that almost doesn't even count. Just as an overview, the title track, Beautiful is one of the underrated classics of the Moby Grape catalog. And also Treat Me Bad is one of the underrated classics of your catalog. You guys have some really good work on this record.
Actually, I haven't listened to this record since we made it. So my memory of it is a little faded. I can remember what the songs are and what they sound like, but I went to try to listen to it and I can't find it. Anything that says Truly Fine Citizen just plays Truly Fine Citizen, that song, which was about our experience in Boston.
I just listened to it this morning.
Where did you get it?
I listened to it on Apple Music.
Oh, okay. That's the limitations of old guys.
So track 2 is Looper, which, is one of the classics that you guys have. And, it's the funniest thing because it was born on amphetamines. This song sounded like it was an amphetamine classic. And by the time it gets to this record, it's crawling. It's almost like being autobiographically truthful to the song and to the band by slowing it down to this draggy, craggy, with your eyes half closed, which adds to its appeal in a way, because why do it the way it was born? That's not who you are now.
Yeah, we were playing Looper before we did our first album.
Yeah.
So Looper was one of our original songs that Peter brought to the band. And you're right, it was phonetic. It was really jammed. I always thought it was, like you said, it was on amphetamine. It was just, and it is actually, this version of it is a little more laid back. It was a good song. It was just about this hippie in New York, this hippie girl.
Oh, really? Now, tell me more, please, because I don't know any.
I can't tell you too much more.
I've always loved Looper, man. Looper, Rounder, all the ER songs that you guys had at the beginning of your career. You should should have had a whole album of one-word tracks that ended with ER. That would have been an amazing side route that you took.
Well, I can tell you at the Taft Hotel, when we were playing Looper, all of us had to go down and get penicillin shots from the doctor there at the hotel. So that had a little something to do with Looper. You can just use your own imagination.
Wait, is that from The Clap?
Well, I suppose, yeah, that would probably, there was something going on down there.
I've heard The Clap is so painful.
It's not any fun. Peter and I and Bob, we weren't the only, we all had to go down there.
He who claps together.
We didn't catch it from each other. Anyway, moving right along.
Oh, hi, I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show per week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. So the title track, which I've heard was inspired by a black self-ordained hippie holy man named Camus that you guys met in Boston in '68. It very well could be the best song on the record. It always has struck me as hysterically funny that a song of this power is only 1:47 seconds.
Well, if you can say it in 1:47, why go any farther,
I agree, but, it's just unbelievable. There's like this twinkle, like a starlight sort of guitar figure that goes on in the chorus there that I just really can't get enough of. So although I do agree with you, I'm always starving for more when the song ends.
Well, it has some kind of like interesting sections in it. Yeah, we were walking around Boston and we saw just this bookstore and this guy was in there and he was in beautiful African garb. He was kingly. He was like a royalty. We went there a couple of times. We went in there and he had Camus juice. He had the stuff that he made that was like he would drink. And he says, this gives you power and authority. And so he gave us both a mason jar full of Camus juice. And so, of course, we would drink or eat anything at that point. So Jerry and I were drinking some Camus juice. We went back the next day to get some more. And he was telling us about the stories of on the mountain and who all of the great forces of darkness and the forces of evil and how he was like, watching over this neighborhood in Boston and, that this bookstore was a front for his ability to create peace and love and power on earth. And he was a magical guy. Yeah. And so that's like the end of it. It goes, maybe you want a book, take a look. And then that's 2 flaming swords of truth going to knock down the forces of evil. Camus is stuck on you. So it was just like most of our songs. It was, it was based out of an event or people in our lives. And so Jerry and I were really taken with Camus. We thought he was just fantastic.
Is that you singing this one?
Jerry and I are both singing it. The solo part is me, but Jerry and I are both singing it.
This does not sound like the work of a contract obligation record. I mean, this is a very inspired piece of work.
Everything we did was the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole record's like that. Beautiful is beautiful. I mean, my favorite line on the record, because it's so offhandedly charming, is, heard you been living up on a hill, are you still? I just love that line. Beautiful is a classic, and I don't understand why I don't hear this song spoken about often, because it's one of your peaks for me.
It was just a song about all of us living up in the mountains up in Boulder Creek.
It's so disarmingly charming to me. And then the last song on the side is Love Song. It sounds a little bit like it was kind of composed on the spot. I would say probably the most minor song on the side, but the side is stuffed with great material.
You know what's funny is I agree with you. Love Song is just pretty simple, and if I had to say that there was like a song on that album that, mostly of our albums didn't have any songs that you could just say that one probably doesn't belong on an album. Maybe that didn't belong. But what's interesting is, aside from Can't Be So Bad, that song was used on a television series. It got plugged into it. What is the part? Can't even sing a love song. Don't you know that's not that love's wrong, or whatever the lines are in that. Anyway, they took that, and I got a nice big check out of that stupid song.
Nice. What television show was that?
I have no idea.
I mean, I don't think this is the worst song on the record.
Oh, well, that's good.
My least favorite is Now I Know High. But I can say that freely because I will say that even though we're not on that song yet, I'm quoting Peter here. I'm not sure which of my songs I'm most proud of, but I do know the ones I truly wish had been left in the can. One of these in particular is the song Now I Know High. It appears on Truly Fine Citizen. I don't know what I was thinking when I pulled it out in front of our then producer, Bob Johnson. He had just finished Dylan's Nashville Skyline, and I guess he let that song get on the record, hoping for the best, like we all were at that time. But if there was ever a tune of mine that got out there while it was still half-baked, Now I Know High it is.
Well, that's Peter's opinion. I don't think he ever wrote any bad songs.
I don't think it's a bad song. I don't think you guys have a bad song.
Yeah, well.
It's just my least favorite, that's all.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, what was put on that record was done, like we talked earlier, it was all done under duress.
Yeah.
And so there was no time we knew that this was going nowhere. But that didn't matter. I don't think we acted like it was going nowhere. We just went in and recorded our music the best we could, So I think that's a cool song, actually.
Listen, I don't skip any songs in this record. I'm just saying you stack it up against the rest. It's my brain, in order to make sense of the universe, I have to pick favorites and first place, second place, but it's just how I make sense of the world. Again, I never skip it, and I don't think you guys have a single bad track in your entire catalog. So side 2, talking about Peter Lewis songs, Right Before My Eyes, is probably the work of greatest import that he delivers to this record.
Right.
This is a great song.
I haven't listened to this album for 50 years or whatever it is, so I really can't comment too much on that song other than I know it was a really cool song. So, but I don't have a great recollection of the song itself. I wish I would have listened to these before I got to speak with you.
That's okay. That's okay. Let me ask you, though, do you not go back to this record a lot because it's a painful time?
No, I don't go back to this record a lot because I don't go back to any of our records a lot. I just don't listen to old Moby Grape music.
Yeah. What's the one you probably, if you had to say, you listen to the most?
I guess just by default, the first one.
Okay. I think Right Before My Eyes, honestly, should be considered a country standard. I really do. I think it's that good. What do you think about this one, Cam?
Oh, I love it. This is great. The first time I heard it was on the Vintage anthology, and Vintage includes 2 songs from this album, Truly Fine Citizen and Now I Know High.
It's got the ad for the album with the title track behind it, yeah.
That's right.
I got Vintage before I got this record, and it really whet my appetite to find it. Your entire catalog, I bought all of it on vinyl on Hate Street.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. You're aficionado. That's awesome, Jim.
Yeah. All right, Open Up Your Heart. This is a very, very sweet song, and this is you guys.
Yeah, this is very nice. And again, I've got, all I can tell you is I could sing some of the melody and some of the parts, but I guess the only thing I could say about this album in general is I think by the time we did 20 Granite Creek, I think we were better musicians and at least more evolved. And I think for the period of time that we had and for the way that this thing was produced, I think all of us played pretty well under the circumstances. So I think the song, Jerry and I wrote that, and Open Up Your Heart, it's a cool song.
I like it. Next is Now I Know High. And one thing I do want to say about it is that it kind of feels like a twist on almost like a country version of Dark Magic, only in that there's so much jamming in it. Because usually, besides Grape Jam, you guys aren't really doing jam type stuff on your records. Your records have more concision to them. And this kind of dips into that well in a way that you could kind of point to Dark Magic as a progenitor of this.
Treat Me Bad, is that the next one?
Yes.
Okay, so I do have a very clear memory of Treat Me Bad, which I think is maybe the best country western, or country rock song, or one of the best country rock songs that Moby Grape did. It's just a great way the way it moves through changes. It's not a standard change. It has some surprises in it that are really interesting. It has great guitar playing in it, great solo, and the lyrics are just awesome. It's just another experience that, you have when you figure your love life isn't going so well. Some of your friends are falling by the wayside and, your career is in the dumpster. So Treat Me Bad, that's the way it's always been.
Yep. This is a very special song, I think. It's easily my favorite song on this side. It always sounds good. Do you remember writing this with Jerry, or is that kind of lost in the mist of time?
I remember, we wrote it in Tennessee.
Okay.
I just like that, where it goes in like to the way you change, and the more you might be gone. And then it goes into a whole other section that I'm looking right up on what you have become. You're not fooling me with what you see. It just has various sections in it that make it very interesting, but it never loses the authenticity of this country feel. And the words are really, really good.
Yeah, great work on this one.
Yeah.
Then the next one, I believe, is the only song that Jerry Miller and Skip Spence ever wrote together, Tongue Tied.
I told Omar, who re-recorded this on the album that will never be seen, on the lost album of Moby Grape. Omar recorded this song, and on The Real Potato, this song just kicks ass. And I told Omar, I said, if I knew this song was that great, I'd have done a better job. but it was a fun song to sing. It's got a lot of energy in it.
Yeah.
Doug singing it.
Last song on the record, Love Song Part 2, because it was so great the first time around, we needed a sequel.
That's right. We had to sing it back.
I love it. It's a samba, just a little tossed off samba, which is a nice, unassuming way to close out the record, I think.
That was just, like you said, that's kind of like it's just a simple song, but it was fine.
Yeah. Here's my capsule review for the record. What I love most about this record is the spacious, live in the room feel to it. Obviously, this is no one's single favorite Moby Grape record, but it's way, way underrated. I always felt most of the material featured a consistent low-key charm, and it's an LP that's always pleasing, if rarely challenging. You guys sound tired and spent and worn down, and that vibe is palpable, but it's also the thread that ties the record together, and oddly always made it a very appealing listen for me. With each additional Grape record I purchased, as I walked the chronology in real time, it kept blowing my mind that the records were always leagues better than I'd been led to believe they'd be. I give this one 4 1/5 stars.
I think it deserves credit. I think it deserves more credit than it was given originally. And when I get back to my house, I'm going to listen to it. I'll probably enjoy it because I haven't heard it for a long, long time.
Yeah, let me know what you think. I'd be really.
I'll take your word for it.
What do you give it from what you remember?
From what I remember, I probably give it a 3.5.
Okay.
4, maybe.
Cam, what about you?
I'm like Don, and I really thoroughly enjoy it. I wrote a long article about the album in 2018 after the Moby Grape book came out. And that's when I really grew to appreciate the album because, the tough thing is like that first album is so stellar that you end up comparing everything to the first album. But then you have to remember these albums all have their own identities and they all can be listened to in different kinds of situations. Right. And so this is like, a nice, relaxing album that you could listen to on a Sunday morning. And I really enjoy it. And I agree with you also, like those 2 songs that are on Vintage, like made me want more.
Yep. I actually have a question now because I took a few questions from the Moby Grape Facebook group. Lou Shank from the Moby Grape Facebook group asks, was the Soul Stew instrumental and tongue-tied session the last studio session that all 5 members played on? I hear 3 guitars and bass on Soul Stew for sure. And by the way, the Soul Stew instrumental and the tongue-tied session, I believe that Lou is referring to the extra cuts at the end of the CD.
And these were recorded in the spring.
So those are bonus tracks.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I was thinking of we're still in Tennessee.
No, this is before. So this is in May and June, before Skip actually left the band.
Right. Yeah, that was all of us playing for sure on Soul Stew. Yeah.
Did you? If you just said Soul Stool,
I did say Soul Stew. I think that might have been
that's a great track
split.
title.
Yeah, you can ask Peter about it. I have no comments on that, actually.
Okay, so you're not sure?
No, I'm not sure.
All right, moving forward. After completing the album, the band went on hiatus until 1971 when you reunited with Skip and Bob to record 20 Granite Creek. So from here forward, there would now be a familiar back and forth pattern of reunion and disbursement for the next couple decades, as you guys, as the five of you in various configurations, strove to continue the story of the Grape, but at the same time being told that the story was no longer, and perhaps never was, your story to begin with, which of course is very frustrating. So this is a new phase as far as I've designated it. Phase 3, the road to redemption, 1971 to 1990. So in the spring of 71, Bob Mosley was magnetically drawn back into the orbit of his old gang, Moby Grape. Although hesitant, he reluctantly, from what I understand, agreed to give the reunion a go and return to the Santa Cruz Mountains. I did talk with Bob about this time, and he said he was always on guard when he was around Skippy. He would always be kind of protective of himself, because from what I understand, there was all kinds of stuff going on with Skippy doing amphetamine, like making his own amphetamine, and a lot of street drug kind of self-treatment stuff, where Bob was trying to use hospital drugs to stay well, at least from what I understand and what Bob says.
Bobby just pulled up in a pickup truck with his amplifier in the back and his bass and said, "Hey, I'm here, man. Let's play some music." And that's kind of my memory of how Bob arrived on the scene. And, he wasn't there to party or to have fun or to do anything other than just to play music, So, right. And there was a lot of stuff going on at 20 Granite Creek.
Now, just to communicate to people who don't know this era, you guys were writing and rehearsing at a communal home, which was also a makeshift studio on Granite Creek Road. And you guys would play sporadic shows at the Chateau Liberté to warm up, right?
Yep.
And the Chateau was like a cross between a hippie retreat and a biker hangout. It was this outpost tucked away in redwood trees, right?
Yeah.
So there was this seed of excitement that was starting to sprout, and you guys played a handful of larger gigs in San Francisco and LA, which was in May. But there was this legendarily chaotic Fillmore East show. When was that? In June, right?
Yeah.
June 71. So these concerts were described through contemporary accounts as disastrous, but in what way were they disastrous? Was there heckling? And I heard Bob got pissed off, or was it Bill Graham who got irate and came backstage and threw a fit? What exactly happened?
Yes to all of that.
Okay. Okay.
We played at the Fillmore East. And again, that was right in the midst of Skippy's real issues, that he was like going off the rails. Bob was not doing very well. We had a rehearsal in the afternoon, the night that we were going to play. And it was actually I believe it was the closing of Fillmore.
It was the week before, yeah.
Yeah, that was like one of the last.
One of the last bands.
B.B. King was on the venue. And so we were privileged enough to be able to be included in kind of the closing of that venue, which was historic. And so we just, we managed to screw it up completely. We played a great gig in the afternoon when we had rehearsals. And then when the night came along and it was time to play, there was some antics on stage. I believe Skip threw his microphone into the audience. Bob was playing in the wrong key. We left the stage before we were finished with our set. It was just a bad scene. And then, Bill Graham came backstage and told us we would never work again in the industry. And,
right.
And dressed us down like only Bill Graham could do. He was a New York tough guy, so that was the results of that. But that didn't have much to do with our recording of 20 Granite Creek. That just had to do with the ability for us to go out and to perform as a band anymore. But we could record, and the reason we could record is because it's more forgiving.
Yeah.
Bob and Jerry and I could go in and record something, and then Peter could come in later and put something on it, and Skippy could put something on it later than that. So it was a lot more forgiving than actual performances. But we did some great gigs up at the Chateau. I don't think any of those got recorded. We played some gigs down in Santa Cruz and played some gigs in Los Angeles. It was just the big center stage and the biggest moment, is the Fillmore East, is where we managed to crash in a spectacular Moby Grape fashion. It was spectacular,
Yeah.
I guess you're going to go out. Why not go out spectacular fashion?
Agreed.
The only better one was in Vegas when I picked up my drum set and threw it off the stage one time. So, I mean, I wish I could have saved that for the Fillmore. That would have been the perfect ending to it. So, yeah.
So, I mean, obviously, it's not reflective of the record, which I know you hold in very high esteem, and Cam actually holds it in such high esteem that his Moby Grape biography begins here, which I thought was a very interesting authorial decision to make. Just in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not quite as big a fan of this record as the two of you guys. I like this record, but I was blown away that Cam starts his book, I believe, in 71, right?
Yeah, I actually wrote about maybe like a 40,000 word book about Granite Creek, and I didn't write anything else. Like, I just wrote that as a kind of self-contained book. And that's what I was pitching to publishers. And then Jawbone was like, "What? You're not going to write about San Francisco? What's going on here?" And so I wrote I wrote the book in two parts. Like, I wrote the Granite Creek story as part one. I didn't think it was part one. I thought that was going to be a book. And then I wrote everything that preceded it as another sort of story, like the original story of the band. And yeah, it's my second favorite Grape album. I love all their albums, but this is like the second one after the first one. And I think from start to finish, like, this is an absolute stellar album that is not just like a 5-star album. This album can stand beside any great album. And you got this versatility. It's such an intriguing story. And then when I wrote the Skip book, I got to explore the story from a slightly different perspective. But it's just mind-boggling that the album didn't sell. It shouldn't matter, but it's just sort of kind of frustrating that it didn't sell. This amazing album that comes out and it gets good reviews. It gets like this amazing review in Rolling Stone magazine. And by that point, Bob is back in Hawaii.
My favorite two songs on this record are About Time, which is a track that you wrote, and Chinese Song.
If I look at an oversight of this album, I think the bones of it, the songs, are all really, really songs I was proud to play on. I think they're all great. I'm not crazy about the mixing and the mastering in some of these songs. I think if I could, I would like to go back in and change the way that they mastered this, because sometimes the parts that shouldn't be covered up are covered up, and it becomes kind of blurry sometimes.
There's a muddiness, a little bit of a muddiness.
Yeah. And that had to do with Rubinson and Ed, when they went to do the mastering or the mixing of it. That has nothing to do with the band or the music that we wrote.
Right.
So the songs are as good as any songs as on any album. And I think my drumming, if I do say so myself as shouldn't, is pretty tasty on some of these songs. I think my drumming went to a little bit more of just a little freer. I'm a rhythm drummer, not a lead drummer.
Yeah.
In this, I was a little freer and a little more open to not just laying down the backbeat, but to create a little bit more. So anyway, that's my take on the album overall. And 20 Granite Creek was up from Santa Cruz, and it was an old monastery. Actually, the monks had lived there for like 50 years or so, and then they sold the place. This was a retreat or a monastery where monks lived. And it was about a 200-yard drive in from the road. So you had to drive in, and you found this beautiful old home with a fireplace in the master bedroom and bay windows with seating areas where you could sit in and look out, and a cleared area, and around it all this forest. It had a wood stove in the kitchen. It was just cool. And then they drove up this truck from the peninsula, from Ed Banion's recording studio that was filled with I think it was a 16-track recording studio inside this truck. And they ran all the wires up into the front door into this kind of little dining area that we just cleared out and created a studio, filled it with soundproofing all around it and put the drums in there. And that was kind of the setup to be able to begin this. Now, I was living there I had lived there. They had rented the place. I think we had it for maybe 4 or 5 months altogether. I was actually living in the house with Mary Keeter. And Mark Alexander, who was our roadie at the time, was living there. And Skip had a room where he would stay sometimes. And he would come up, and when he could stay, when he couldn't get back to wherever he was going, I think he was staying up at the chateau at that time also. They were cooking meth out in an outbuilding, and, he was doing a lot of dangerous drugs at that time that were just like really not conducive to the band. However, Gordon Stevens, who was like Skip went and met Gordon, who is a wonderful, wonderful musician. And you can't believe how cool this guy is, what a great man he is. Philosopher and knowledge of all things, and played in the symphony and had a music store in San Jose. And Skip went in and introduced himself in the music store and said, I'm Skip. I hear you play viola or violin. Let's play. And they sat in the music store and started to play. And then they had kind of a symbiotic relationship. He plays on the whole album. I guess the point is that there was like a real track for Skip at this point with Gordon to do something creative and wonderful. They had some really great ideas. But I think the drugs just destroyed the future that Skip had, which is a shame, because I know that it would have been wonderful to hear what else he was going to do.
This episode is brought to you in part by Bespoke LA. Located in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles, Bespoke LA is the modern podcaster's dream come true. It's got 2 podcast pods available, one with audio only and the other with both audio and video. Just think, you can start your own podcast tomorrow without investing a single penny in equipment. What, you don't have experience editing? Don't even sweat it. For an additional fee, Bespoke LA can edit your podcast. Or not, it's entirely up to you. Rates start at $75 an hour with discounts if you book 4 sessions at once. Go to bespokela.com/podcast. That's BSPOKELA.com/podcast for more information or to book your time today. And be sure to tell them that Dave sent you for a one-time 25% discount.
Mary Keeter, who was like my girlfriend at the time, she was staying with me at 20 Granite Creek. This was before the van showed up with all of the stuff inside, with for the recording studio. And we were playing a gig, and I came back, and these guys that were in the outbuilding outside of the main building that were cooking up meth, they had left. They were bikers. And I heard Mary told me this story. She took a pan, like an old iron pan, and a wooden spoon, and she went, bang, 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 bang. She went out and busted into that room and said, "You guys get the hell out of here. Bang, bang, bang. You don't belong here. This is not a place for bang, 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 for that kind of activity. Just get your activity and get the hell off our property." That's a warrior woman, right? You don't want to be messing with that woman. Yeah, so that's the Mary Keeter that ran off the bikers. I love that. It was a really great thing. So I had a birthday there, and there was some nice music made there, and there was some really great songs. Again, I think every song on that album could be on any album, and it got lost in the translation a little bit, but not in the bones of the songs.
I know my favorites are About Time, Apocalypse, Chinese Song, and Horse Out in the Rain. Those are, I think, the most inspired songs on the record. I like Gypsy Wedding, Mosley, but his version on his solo record with the horns, I think actually is the better treatment of the song. I prefer that one anyway. What do you guys think are the most inspired moments of the record?
Well, I like the one that Jerry and I did is Kind of Man You Can Trust. Again, a great country rock song with really cool guitar solo in it that just swings like hell, As a matter of fact, it goes from a country swing, funky shuffle into a rhythm and blues shuffle, which is really quite interesting. But I agree with you. I think the songs that you pointed out are probably, the most interesting. Chinese Song.
Tell me about how that came to be, because that's obviously an outlier. You have no other song that sounds or feels like Chinese Song.
Yeah, I think Chinese Song was like so far ahead of its time. And there's not a moment in that song that isn't authentic. You would think it was done by some ancient people who were like, that was their life, is to play music on the koto, or that it was done in Hollywood for a film.
Right.
I mean, it's just perfect.
It's beautiful. Is that Skip actually playing the koto?
Yeah, that's Skip. And that's Gordon playing the harmony parts on the violin.
Okay.
And that's some very interesting percussion that was able to open up to be able to play where it was just free form.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so was that improvised?
Well, yeah, all the percussion was just total free form. It had nothing to do with, any prescribed idea of how it should be played.
Okay.
Just by the sound of the music.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. Sometimes I'll just put on the record and put that on because I just feel like hearing that.
Right.
I love how Horse Out in the Rain, how it kind of ends. Although I always kind of felt like the sequencing of Chinese song after that would have given it even more additional gravitas. But it works also at the beginning of the second side.
Horse Out in the Rain. Again, even at the time, I thought that a lot of it got cut in the editing. But it's just like such an emotional song. And you can hear the violin. I mean, it's like it weeps. And then the guitar parts, the whole thing is like it's a weeping. The song sounds to me as if it's so emotional. And it cuts in and cuts out. What can you say about that? Except that Peter just writes brilliant songs. And Apocalypse, excuse me?
Yeah, yeah. At the risk of asking the world's most obvious question, is Moby Grape the horse out in the rain?
We can't tell you that.
You'll have to kill him.
We've been sworn to secrecy.
Or is Kate's the fucking horse out in the rain?
Yeah, I really would love to tell you.
All right, I don't want to be the one guy who doesn't give it the highest rating. I'm going to go with 3.25 stars on this one.
Well, I'll just see your 3.25 and raise you at least 1.5.
Well, I know it's a 5-star record to you guys, and that's great.
Yeah. And again, that's a giving consideration to the mixing. It was done in such a way that it almost killed the record. But I'm talking about the songs on this album. These songs are solid, as good as anything we've ever written. And the musicianship is as good, if not better, than anything we ever did, in my opinion.
Yeah. Man, is it a different sounding record than the last one? It's like a different band. And then you guys reformed several times over the following years, featuring different combinations of the members. So let's talk about 1978's Live Grape, which, if I had to choose one record that would be my least favorite of all the Grape stuff, it would be this one. But that being said, I'm going to leap to the end here and just say I give it 3 stars. It's not like I don't like the record, but to me, it's the least distinctive release. But I'm going to just talk about my favorite songs on this. And again, there's no Don and no Mosley on this one. It's John Oxendine on drums, Daniel Spencer, Chris Powell on bass. Otherwise, we got the rest of the guys. My favorite songs on this must be Goin' Now, Dear, Skip Spence, which is just awesome because it's like this almost heavy metal like blues stomp. It's Skip firing on all cylinders, I think. You Got Everything I Need, Jerry's 12-minute song, is incredible. It's really cool. It's the closest you guys ever came to jazz, and it's a true epic. I mean, at 12 minutes, it's the closest you probably ever came to Dark Magic on an actual album as well.
Yeah, I wasn't there, so I can't tell you.
I know. But as a listener, also, that Lost Horizon is a really good Peter Lewis song. And Here I Sit is a really good Jerry song.
Yeah, Lost Horizon that was done on Matthew's Heart album.
Okay.
I hate that album.
You do? What? That's the one from 84?
Yeah, with a passion.
All right, so I'm not going to give my capsule review. So Live Grape, I give 3 stars. Then the Grape broke up again in 79. The 1980s saw the band reform again on 2 occasions. First in 83, with a lineup consisting of Peter, Jerry, Bob, and you, Don, which released the Heart album, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I won't go into all of the details. But Peter was up in Seattle and stayed with me. It was around Christmas, and he stayed at my house for a couple of weeks. And Richard Dean, who was the keyboard player that I had played with down in Santa Cruz, had moved up to the Northwest. Very good player, really good B3 Hammond organ player and keyboard player. And Larry B. Acalana, who is my best friend. You get like 3 or 4 best friends in life. He was my best friend. And the guy could sing and play drums, and wonderful, wonderful player. And so we rehearsed up at my house in Seattle for weeks, to this album. Richard had a couple of songs on there. Peter had some songs. Jerry and I had a couple. We had Too Old to Boogie, and we had a couple of other ones too that we were going to offer on it. And so Peter went back down to L.A., and Larry and Richard went down with him, and Matthew set up the studio, and we were all going to, and Matthew, it was like Matthew's, it was kind of like his, let's get back together, let's forgive and forget, I'm sorry, let's just get back together and do something, together that, where we can do something great with Moby Grape again. It's like, let's make Moby Grape great again. So anyway, so Jerry and I flew back down a few weeks later to Los Angeles to the studio, and we walk in the studio, and there's this guitar player from Russia and Skip Saylor, who's the drummer, and they had all this, they've been there rehearsing for days, and they had just...
Who's the drummer?
I think his name's Skip Saylor, I think was his name. Interesting. Matthew doesn't even give credit on the album to the players, which is so typical. It doesn't give any respect to anybody but himself. And so somehow Matthew had got Bob and Peter. Now all of a sudden Bob and Peter and Larry and Richard, and Skip Saylor and this Russian guitar player, they were Moby Grape. And Jerry and I walked in, and we did one song, we laid down a song, and then we realized what the hell was going on. And we said, we're out of here, man. What are you doing?
So wait, are you not on the record except for that one
song? And I sent a certified letter to Matthew and said, Jerry and I want you to take our song off that album. We want nothing to do with it. The only good thing that came out of it was my friend Larry got to be able to, you got to see how great he could sing. You listen to Lost Horizon and you'll hear, him sounding like Mosley, only it sounds like Larry. So my friend Larry got to finally get a recording it. But yeah, Jerry and
I didn't realize. So you and Jerry are not really represented on the record.
We are on the record. He didn't take it off.
But what I'm saying is you're only on the one song that you...
On the one song. All the other is, Skip Saylor and this Russian guitar player. He's a good guitar player, but it wasn't Moby Grape sound. It was like a totally different type of guitar. Totally.
Well, also, besides the fact that...
Yeah, it's a heavy metal guitar player, right? That's right.
Besides the fact that it's Kate's producing, it's also only first takes, from what I understand. This is all first takes.
No, probably because I wanted to save money.
Possibly so, but I think that was the ideology going in, is we're just going to lay it down, and it is what it is.
It's just Matthew wanted to save money because he's cheap.
Okay, so here's my...
I sound bitter?
Well, look, I can't believe you guys wound up working with this asshole again.
Well, it was put into such a way that it was, all I can tell you is that it was kind of like a fresh start. He said, there was a consolatory feel to it. It was like an invitation. Let's get together. Let's do this. We'll bring your friends in, Richard and Larry, and we'll just do the Grape, and it'll be just great, And so I'm surprised that we fell for it too. You're right. It was like ridiculous that I should ever think that Matthew would do anything that...
Well, Don, in your defense, my friend, you want it to be true, because after a lifetime of having this shitstorm rain down on you, who doesn't want a fucking happy ending?
Well, and we rehearsed up in Seattle to where we were sounding really good. We had some stuff going on. Now, Jerry was up there, and myself and Peter, and we get down there, and they pulled the rug out from under Jerry and I.
Yeah. I think at the very least, the album is sequenced perfectly, because in my view of it, there's two great songs on the record, and it's the first two songs. So that's Silver Wheels, which is one of Peter's better songs, I think. The album can't kill it for me. There's like a creepiness to this one that's borderline unsettling, and I really like it. And then Mosley and Spence, you would think that they would have written 1,000 songs together, considering they have so much in common. But it's only this one song, Better Day, which is the only co-write of those two, and I think a very powerful song. There's
4 or 5 songs on it. Queen of the Crows is a cool song.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of other ones on there. I think there are 12 songs. I think there's 5 of them that I would say were pretty cool.
Yeah, I would say 6. Half the record is, I give it 3 stars, but I can understand based on, your experience with it, how even the good points you would overlook.
Yeah, I don't like anything about it, but I can't deny that these guys wrote some good songs on there.
So, like in the late 80s, you guys come together again. Now, this is a whole different tale. And because of the ongoing legal battle, still, even though you guys had the Hard album with Kate's, other names were used during this period for performance or recording purposes, including Mosley Grape, Legendary Grape, Maybe Grope, the previously used Fine Wine, and the Melvilles, which led to the 1989 Legendary Grape album. being considered by some to be a Melville's recording. Now, maybe you guys can straighten me on this because there's so many different versions of this bouncing around. But originally, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a cassette and it did not have the full 18-track lineup that I have. It was like a condensed version of what eventually was expanded out into. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there was bonus tracks put on that. First off, it was just done by us and it was on a cassette. Hand decorated. We sat around a table and with watercolors and whatever and decorated each of the cassettes. You know, it's just kind of interesting. They're like probably collector's items. But there was a number of bonus tracks that were put on at a later time. I think there's probably 6. Yeah. I'm not sure how many, 5 or 6 songs that were added onto it.
Which, by the way, you know, if you're going to get this, get the full thing because all 18, there's only maybe a couple tracks that I'm not fully in love with, but I'm talking 18 songs, a couple tracks that aren't killers. It really is, to me, you know, having not heard The Real Potato, this is, you know, that's why I call it the road to redemption. To me, this is the redemption, is you guys hung in there, and somehow at the end of the line here, you have this record that is just phenomenal. And from David Frick's liner notes, he wrote, for nearly a year in 1988 and 1989, Miller, Stevenson, and Mosley regularly gigged up in the Pacific Northwest, and Lewis often flew in from his home in California. The group, which included Kurt Tuttle on drums and guitarist Dan Abernathy, completed the recording over 4 days. So we're talking the same amount of time, basically, as Truly Fine Citizen, one additional day. And the amount of great work here is fucking staggering. First of all, it starts with a Skip song, because Skip wasn't at all involved with this, right?
Right.
Did you try to get Skip involved, but he wasn't in a good place?
No.
No?
No.
Okay. The way it starts, the record starts perfectly, because you have Skippy represented, plus this song. It's as simple and straightforward and direct as Omaha. Plus, there's a killer Miller slide solo. And so I believe, and I'm guessing.
That's not Miller, that's Dan Abernathy.
Okay, got it. I was going to ask. Okay, first recorded by Skippy in 1972 and released by Sundays right after Skip's passing as a single. This is just a great tune. I love this song. And then to follow it up with one of Bob's best songs ever, Nighttime Rider. I could listen to that on a loop that goes on forever. I just love this song. And to think that he was capable of work like this at a time when he was kind of just entering into his period of homelessness is just wild to me.
Yeah, Bob was in a good place. We were all up in Seattle, and we were playing like gigs in different taverns, different bars at the time. Dan Abernathy was playing guitar with us, and it was Richard Jupe on drums. And I was playing percussion and just singing, you know, lead when we were playing on some of the songs when we were playing, you know, live. But yeah, Bobby was in a good place. We were all up there at, Michon, and Joseph was, who just came up here. I just spent some time with Joseph Miller, who's a beautiful young man now. He was like a baby. He was 2 years old. And I used to put him on my knees and at the house there and play drums when we were rehearsing. And he'd sit on my knee and I'd play drums with him sitting there. And he'd have drumsticks and play with me. And that was pretty cool. So, yeah, Bob was doing really well. Peter was hanging out. You know, Jerry was there. I always say that we were so prepared. We had done so much work in rehearsing in this album that we could walk into a studio and do it in 3 days. And we did do it in first takes, but it was not because we were cheap. It was because we were broke. And we knew it just like we knew our first album.
And this is, by the way, one of those records where Peter Lewis is kind of in the shadows as far as songwriting goes. But his contribution to this record, which out of 18 songs is only 1 track, is so good that it very easily could have been a hit single. It sounds like Tom Petty to me, actually. It's called Changing.
The original album was 12 songs.
Yeah.
And so it closed with Further On Up the Road. You know, that was the end of it. And so, you know, it Don't Take Much and Getting Used to Being Treated Wrong and 40 Foot Tall and Forbidden Love and Telephone Love.
Forbidden Love is one of my favorite songs you've written ever.
That's a good country song, you know. Bob hated it. You can ask Bob, he didn't like it because it was talking about such scandalous behavior. I couldn't help myself.
By the way, another great one that you did for this record is Getting Used to Being Treated Wrong. And of course, I'm a sucker for any Moby Grape song that feels autobiographical. The title, you had me at the title, you know?
Yeah, well, my favorite song on the album that I did was On the Dime.
Uh-huh.
You know, I really thought that moved along. And Getting Used to Being Treated Wrong, I actually put that on my Buskin' in the Subway album with Mellencamp and those guys. You know, this was a good version.
Yeah.
You know? But that was the original. That was kind of the drawing, and then the final came down when we did Buskin' in the Subway. But it's a good song. Yeah, it's the blues, man.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you get treated wrong, you know, and pretty soon you just get used to it.
Another one I want to point out is, and Mosley is really on fire here, Bitter Wind in Tanganyika. Holy shit. What a song. I mean, even though he's a belter, and Gypsy Wedding and Hoochie and Soul Stew, that's really kind of the typical Mosley. My favorite Mosley is the rose-colored glasses Nighttime Rider Mosley. I like the drift.
Right. Bitter Wind in Tanganyika. It's so haunting, you know, and his voice sounds great. His voice sounds really great on that. I'm not sure what was going on in Tanganyika at the time, but I'm sure there was a bitter wind, or Mosley wouldn't have said it.
It sounds like the title of an epic novel.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. This one, I really do want to read my capsule review. One would think there'd be no way for a bunch of guys at this point in the story to have such a late in the game victory, seeing as you'd been pummeled endlessly going on now for so long. But not only would you be wrong, but the record itself isn't all that's great about this. You actually need the 18-track collection with all the cast-off material because all of it's of such high caliber. The only tracks I don't really care for are a couple of covers toward the middle of the record, but really at 18 tracks, for the overstuffed expanded edition, it's a very small and insignificant squabble. And most importantly, all the original material, thankfully, finds everybody operating in absolute top form. Legendary Grape is a total, absolute vindication. You guys had absolutely nothing left to prove anymore. And this I give 4.5 stars.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Give It Hell is a heck of a song. That's a great song. Lady of the Night, excuse me. And Jerry and I wrote You'll Never Know. To me, that was probably the best kind of like ballad harmony with a lot of intricate work since 805. You listen to all the harmonies. It touches me. You know, you probably should let other people blow your horn, but I would give this one a 5 too, because I think that there isn't a song on there. Talk About Love, You'll Never Know, Lady of the Night. Give It Hell if you just put a backbeat on it and just like, you know, like late in the city, I was living in the city, a warm summer night, you know, so it would be a really cool hip hop song.
Yeah, yeah.
And then got into the Give It Hell. I mean, that is, you talk about everything went wrong. My baby's done grown. My mama done gone. That I still might make it. I get excited about the album. I love that album. You know, I love.
I got to say that the way that it goes out on Rodeo, at least on the expanded version, I much prefer that as a way to go out because it's an introspective closer. You know, especially if Potato never comes out. This is it for the Grape. Would be Rodeo.
Well, and Rodeo is. I always thought that's probably one of the best cowboy songs ever written. You got some guy sitting in a bar drinking a beer. By the time he's done with this, he's crying.
Yeah, yeah.
It's being that little cowboy that was riding on his daddy's back when he was a little kid, and how he gets through life and ends up being the cowboy that now he's the bronc that can't be rode. There's a little cowboy that can't be throwed. You know, I mean, that just it's just, you know, it's like. It's the best cowboy song ever.
It's a really great record. And then we enter phase 4, Nothing Left to Prove, 1990 to the present. So in the late 80s, you start to see Moby Grape material being released on CD by the San Francisco sound label, which is Kate's. And of course, shoddy sound quality, terrible packaging, and you guys were never compensated for the music. Kate's took all the money, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, these releases were known and seen as just like thievery. But the double CD 1993 Legacy Recordings compilation, Vintage, which we have talked about ad nauseum through this entire special, was kind of the turning point, right, Cam? Isn't that where things start coming together for these guys where they're properly represented by some releases?
Yeah, you have a couple things. Vintage comes out, and Bob Irwin advocates for it to be a 2-disc set, rightly so, absolutely. And it thankfully comes out as a 2-disc set. So you have that. David Frick, from Rolling Stone, he's really, a fan of Moby Grape. And so he's advocating for the band. And then you have Johnny Angel writes an article for, I think it's LA Weekly, and it's about Skip. It's just after Vintage comes out. And so you have these things all at one time.
Let's just stop for 1 second, because that article, when that came out, and I read it, I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I had just discovered Moby Grape. And that article, along with Vintage and your debut record, blew my world open. And I remember that time very well, and it's marked by your music. And that article, I've probably read it 30 times. I have the paper. It's right in the next room. I have the original newspaper that it was from, and it left a huge mark on me.
So the other thing that's converging at this time is you also get the internet exploding. And so I tracked down the article later on the internet, not in 95, but it was a few years later because I'm up in Toronto. And I guess another thing that you have that's happening at that time is you have a lot of big names acknowledging Moby Grape's influence. So you have somebody like Robert Plant, and he's covering Moby Grape songs and Skip songs. And that's a huge name. It doesn't get any bigger than that. A few years later, you get Bruce Springsteen, like he covers Omaha right around the time Skip passes on his tour. Chrissie Hynde from the Pretenders, a lot of big names now are talking about Moby Grape and acknowledging them. Perhaps they picked up Vintage and were reminded of the Grape. And also, like, that was the first time the music is more accessible. And so you got like these big things. And unfortunately, the lawsuit's still lingering, right? It won't be finished for like another 13 years from 1995. It's not finished until 2006. So unfortunately, you got all these things really pushing for the Grape to get back together. And, maybe they can make another album. Maybe things can work out for them. And that's the hope. I mean, certainly in the Vintage liner notes, like you're left with that hope. And unfortunately, it can't happen. You got those big things converging, though, at that time. And so that's when I discovered the band. Was right around the time Vintage came out.
And Vintage, that was shut down.
Yeah, unfortunately, it went out of print. Yeah.
I mean, the thing that was really heartbreaking is that thing was done as a act of love, right? Mm-hmm. They went in and redid it and did it digitally and mixed it, and it sounded brilliant. And Matthew put a stop to it.
And it got coverage in Entertainment Weekly.
It could have sold some copies for sure and done even more good than it did. But he went and put the kibosh on the whole thing. They shut it down. They didn't want to deal with Matthew. Yeah. So pretty much the end of it, right? When you talk to Peter, talk about Glenn Miskel and about the people that came after that to represent us and to get us our name back and to get us our publishing. Although, now it's like I said earlier, it's like mailbox money. There's nothing. I mean, Matthew skimmed the top and got all of the wealth. I don't begrudge that because I think, like I said, I barely managed to escape fame and fortune.
Well, the trouble only really abated once he passed, right?
Well, there was some things that were done in the court through Glenn Miskel, and where he got our name back and got our publishing back. But Peter was like really versed in that whole thing. He was like involved a lot, went to a lot of court proceedings, and saw Matthew melt in front of the judge a couple of times.
Yeah. Skippy passed on April 16th, 1999, 2 days before what would have been his 53rd birthday. But you guys, in 2006, after 3 decades of court battles, you guys finally won back your name and reformed. Again, it's been like coming back together, doing your own thing. But one thing I always, this whole time that I've always really admired about you, Don, is that the Grape wasn't the only thing you did, and you had a life outside of it. And I know, without even asking you, that it had to have kept you sane. And I always really admired you about that.
I admire Peter and Bob and Jerry for being lifers. That's my admiration for them.
Yeah.
My path took a different path. I took a different path. I never stopped creating or stopped loving music or playing music, but I needed to support people. And to be able to do that, I needed to find out what other gifts I had. And I found out that I was a pretty good salesman, that
Yeah.
it worked out well for me.
That's good.
And a good trainer and a good closer. And, I ended up in a great position up in Whistler. I mean, how can you complain about living in a beautiful place like Whistler, British Columbia, where you go skiing in the winter and play golf in the summer and run a room of 32 salespeople and people coming in from all over the world to visit your mountain? The Olympics were there. And I had a club that we sold that we didn't overestimate. We underpromised and over-delivered. And you could put a timeshare caption on it, but it wasn't really. It was like we partnered with Disney. We had villas in Tuscany, and it was just upscale all the way. It started at $25,000, and people walked into our room, and we'd sell them a membership so they could have Whistler as part of their winter homes, And
Yeah.
so that was something I ended up being very proud of. And again, I still played and wrote music, but it was just on a different level because I was making a living for my family. And as soon as I stepped out of that, which was back when I was about 71 years old, and I went full blast music again, because that's where my heart is, and that's what I love.
And I want to say also, in terms of Cam's entrance into this, his detailed biography that came out in 2018, What's Big and Purple and Lives in the Ocean, the Moby Grape story. It was published in the US and the UK by Jawbone, and it's a great book. Cates, thankfully, although there's seriously no justice in a sense, because he died at the old age of 93. Somehow these pieces of shit people wind up living so late into life just to taunt you as far as whether or not there's actually a God out there. And then Jerry, unfortunately, passed very recently, July 20th, 2024, at the age of 81. And, Don, I know he was a songwriting partner very late into life, but as far as, that sidecar being empty right now, like I said, your songwriting on your own is just a thing of beauty, and your solo records have been progressively better and better. And the work you're doing now is the best stuff that's flowed from your pen since you started writing, I think. And it's typically not the story, but like I said, you battling against these forces, I think if you hadn't, it would be like the typical story, but you had to fight for success. And it made you probably it's one of the things that made you better and better as time went on.
Well, it's interesting. I think stepping away from music for a while I have a pent up music when I started to play again and to write again full time. But even the experience of what Moby Grape went through, just the life experience, it toughened me up also to the point where the job that I chose is a job that was total meritocracy.
This is just a small thing that I did that when I listen to a band's entire discography, I get like a 30,000 foot bird's eye view of the whole thing. And here is my little thing I did that's the arc of your band, as I see it. The journey of Moby Grape is a wildly difficult story to hear, so to imagine actually living it is impossible. The incredible promise dangled before the five of you at the outset was so intense, and you didn't even make it a year into your journey before things fell apart as spectacularly as they did. All your struggles are encoded into the wonderful music you made, and the crippling uphill climb that the five of you braved is somehow often conveyed in the breeziest, most laid-back manner possible, seemingly as counterpoint to the madness in which you were ensconced. But you hung in there, not just to prove a point, but I'm guessing sometimes, why not, just to prove a point. In case you ever lay awake at night, still wondering was it all worth it, I wish I could provide an answer, but I can say with absolute certainty that you have been a massively important force in my own life, a power substantive enough to exist independent of the music it created, of which I often think when I wonder if an uphill climb in my own life will be worth undertaking. And when I think of your faces, the answer almost always comes right to me, and it comes loud, full force, at maximum volume. They hung in there, they did it, so fuck it, you can too. So I say, fuck you, Matthew Cates, and to all future Matthew Cateses out there in your various industries looking forward to taking advantage of people who have something substantive to say and to give the rest of us, get the fuck out of the way, let the message be spoken. Thank you so much, Don. You did it for you, but you did it for me too.
Well, thank you, David, for doing this. I think it's going to be something that will last for posterity, and that it'll be something that when people want to know about our story, they're going to be able to refer to this as the real story. So I appreciate it. Appreciate you giving us all a voice. And it was fun talking to you. I enjoyed it. So thank you.
It was an honor. It was so great talking with you. And just so you have it here, I always do a top three. My third favorite is Wow. My second is Moby Grape 69. And my favorite's the debut. Do you guys have a top three? I know, Don, your number one is the debut. Number two is 20 Granite Creek, right?
I go back and forth between 69 and 20 Granite Creek. And then the Millvilles kind of slip in there periodically also. So those are almost tie. Tie goes to Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. It depends what day it is. But,
yeah.
But you know what's interesting, and I'll just finish with this, is I want to give some recognition to the early days. I didn't really talk about that, but basically from being a sophomore in high school up until I was well into my 20s, those days playing with the Continentals, with Butch Nordahl, and playing with the Playboys and the Frantics, and going through those formative years were just fantastic. It's what gave me that love for music. And through all of this, so it doesn't sound like, sour grapes, so to speak. Yeah. Through all of it, the ability to be able to come together and to play music was always the saving grace. It was just a thrill to be able to play with these guys and to be able to participate in this music. And I'm so grateful for all of the breaks that we got. And there's even a little sympathy for the devil, but I won't go into the sympathy for the devil part. But I am grateful for all of the chances I had to be able to play with these men. And they're my brothers, like going to war with people. They'll always be my brothers. I love them. I love them dearly.
All right, that about does it. Stay tuned, because next week brings upon us a brand new episode in the Grape Expectations series. It's part 3 of my chat with Moby Grape's Peter Lewis, the final segment of our interview. And holy shit, is it a doozy. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the major tier gets a very special treat. And man, do I mean special. In case you were wondering how we jumped from Peter Lewis Part 1 to Part 3, congrats on being so perceptive. Monday's bonus episode is Peter Lewis Part 2, which leads directly into next week's podcast. For this earlier part of our conversation, my only suggestion is to hang on tight, because we are in very intense territory right out of the gate. For super fans of the Beach Boys' David Marks interview, you're in for a rare treat. There will be a very short sneak peek running publicly for free on Monday morning, but the entirety of the show will only be accessible on the major tier of our Patreon. Don't miss it, or you'll only be getting part of the story. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their early release, ad-free, super extended director's cut of Part 3 of Moby Grape's Peter Lewis. It's the episode as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then come Friday, everyone else gets to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Don Stevenson, Cam Cobb, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator, and much, much more. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. So now that it's done and you want more, another way to dive even deeper into the classic rock and roll from the 1960s is to go to the Beach Boys Season 1, Catch a Wave, 1961 to 1964, from episode 189 on, the Righteous Brothers Bill Medley interview, that's 181 and 182, my interview with the Free Design, that's 160 to 162, my epic interview with the Mamas and Papas Michelle Phillips, that's 141 to 159, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, that's 137, my 12-hour interview with Terry Kirkman and Jules Alexander from the Association, that's 109 to 113, Vashti Bunyan reading her entire output, that's 103 to 104, Sergio Diaz from Os Mutantes, that's 86 and 87, Bert Summer, that's 83 and 84, Sweetwater is episode 79, a tribute to David Crosby, 77 and 78, Andrew Tuttle rates the Monks, 74, Jim Florentine on Black Sabbath is 64 to 68, Lou Barlow on the Zombies is 59 and 60, Marvin Gaye biographer David Ritz rates Marvin Gaye, that's 45 to 47. Blind Faith is 43. Anthony Fantano rates the Velvet Underground, it's 32 and 33. Bob Forrest rates the band, is 25 and 27. Monkees manager Andrew Sandoval rates the Monkees, that's 22 and 23. Don Randy rates David Axelrod, is 17. Badfinger is 16. The Bee Gees is 10 and 11. Sly and the Family Stone is 5, 6, and 7. And Pink Floyd is 1 and 2. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, June 20th, we're coming at you with the next installment of Grape Expectations. It's Peter Lewis Part 3. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!